extracted from the earth instead of sending them to landfills where they're not really doing us much good. And here's a few illustrations just to elaborate on that point, and that, you know, water exists in cycles. It's solid, it's a liquid, it's a gas, and it can flow between all three stages. And you know, carbon is the same way. Organic life is the same. And so, you know, over millions and billions of years, the Earth has established these systems to where all of our natural resources, all of our minerals, our nutrients are going in these cycles where they are, you know, never really wasted. They're just existing in different forms. Even rocks are exist in a natural cycle where rocks become sediment and sediment becomes soil, and it goes through a whole cycle as well. So as much as we can, we want to try and fit within these systems of nature. And there's a quote that's pretty small in the bottom right-hand corner picture in the middle of that earth, but I'll read it out because I think it's important. It says, "Sustainability is about the ability of human society to continue indefinitely within these natural cycles." So again, just as much as we can try to mimic nature, mimic the natural cycles of the earth, the better off we will be, because not only are we supporting our earth, but we're supporting future generations of life on earth. So whenever we're talking about waste, you know, we're usually talking about products, and products are usually come from resources. And, you know, one definition of resource is a source of supply, support, or aid, especially one that can be readily drawn upon when needed. And oftentimes, you know, most of the time, the products that we're consuming are natural resources. And one definition of natural resource is the natural wealth of a country, consisting of land, forests, mineral deposits, water, etc. It's the abundance or lack thereof of, you know, the natural resources, the things in nature that we can readily draw upon to create the products and the systems that we rely on. So the top natural resources around the world that we do rely on, in no particular order, but they are water, air, coal, oil, natural gas, phosphorus, and other minerals, oftentimes for growing our food, iron, soil, and forests and timber. So naturally, some of these resources are more able to exist in a cyclical nature. You know, things like water can be cleaned and reused, recycled, air as well. But other things like, you know, oil, coal, natural gas, these are not renewable resources. They aren't things that we can just recycle as we would like to reuse them. They are ultimately going to deplete themselves once we extract them off from the earth and we use them. And at that point, we'll kind of be SOL, just out of luck, and not really ready to sustain ourselves if we're just relying on these resources that are limited. So, you know, as I just mentioned, some of these resources are more cyclical or circular in nature. Some of them are more linear. So even something like a landfill would be an example of something that exists in a linear fashion, to where we are extracting resources from the earth, we make things out of them, we use them, we dispose them, and then when they go to the landfill, they just sit and they become this mountain of trash that may create a little bit of electricity for us, but ultimately is doing more harm than good, and is not really benefiting us or future generations. And all those resources that are locked up in that landfill are gone. We're not able to reuse them and recycle them. So as much as we can, we want to try and function in a circular system where we're making things, we're consuming them, but then we use those materials to enrich future, you know, generations of whatever it may be. So maybe it's composting, and maybe it's an abundance of food waste. And instead of sending that food waste to the landfill, if we can compost it, those nutrients are going to go back into the soil, support the plants that are living in them, and those plants are just going to be happier and healthier and more abundant because of it. And it also supports the life in the soil. So just trying to exist as much as we can in a circular type of fashion, to where we're reusing and repurposing our materials as much as possible. Here's a little chart, a graph of the waste generation in the United States from 1960 to 2013. And the blue triangles represent the total waste generated. So back in 1960, on an annual basis, we were creating about 88 million tons of waste. And today we are creating, or sorry, in 2013, which is the last year on this chart, it has nearly tripled to 254 million tons of waste generated in 1 year. And if we break that down on a per person level, you know, back in 1960, each person was generating about 2.6 or 2.7 pounds of waste per day. And currently today, or my apologies again, 2013, we're generating more along the lines of 4.4 pounds of waste each day. And this consists of both recyclable and non-recyclable materials, but let's check out the recycling rates as time has gone on as well. So again, going back to 1960, the blue triangles represent the total amount of recycling. And in 1960, we had 5.6 million tons of recyclables that were collected and recycled. And today we are recycling far more, 2013, 87.2 million tons of recycled material. And if we break this down of the percent of the material out there that is recyclable, that gets recycled, it you know, it was only 6% in 1960. So we've increased that a lot to where we're recycling 34% of the recyclable materials that there are, but you know, this is nearly a third. So although we've improved over the years, we're still only recycling a fraction of the amount that we really can be. And so a lot of those resources are being wasted and being sent to landfill where they're not doing us any good. If we break it down by material, we see that the most successful recycling material or recyclable material is lead acid batteries. And that's largely because there are huge environmental consequences for it. So there are very harsh laws and policies for car dealerships or mechanics to recycle those lead acid batteries because they can do significant damage to our environment. And then as we work our way across the line, we see that about 70% of steel cans are recycled. Steel cans have a financial incentive, so folks like to recycle those more often because they can earn some money back from those. But newspapers are also pretty well recycled. Those are recycled at 67%. 60% of yard trimmings are recycled. Aluminum beer and soda cans are about 55%. 40% of tires get recycled, as well as electronics. Only 34% of glass is recycled, and only 31% of plastic bottles and jars are recycled. So in these arenas, we could be doing a lot better, but you know, there are certain limitations to these abilities to recycle, which I'm going to get into in a second, which we see here in our current state. Our recycling is actually taking a big hit. Recycling facilities are not able to work in the same manner because of the stay-at-home orders. And some of you may have heard about our current recycling situation, which is that we don't really have buyers for our recyclables. For about as long as I've been alive, for just about the past 30 years, China has been our #1 buyer of recyclables. So we were sending about a third of our recyclable material to China, and they were buying it and recycling those materials to make new products. But over time, Americans, as well as other countries around the world, began contaminating those loads more, and we were starting to send these really contaminated batches of recyclables to China and to other countries. And when these batches were so contaminated, they actually can't really do much with them. So China decided that they've had enough of our crap, and they decided that they're not going to take it anymore. I mean, they're generating enough waste on their own to handle their own waste, and they don't need to be importing recyclables from all other countries around the world. So being that China was our #1 buyer of recyclables, and they no longer purchase our recyclables, we really hit a wall here in the United States to where we don't have the buyers, we don't have the facilities to process our recyclables here in the United States. And not only that, but this current COVID situation is generating more waste at home. People being at home more often is creating more waste, and the lack of business going on is actually decreasing the amount of recyclables. So if you think about a business office or any other sort of business that might be generating recycled paper, recycled plastics, cardboard is a huge source of recyclable material that we rely on. But with the economy kind of being at a standstill right now, recycling has really taken a huge hit. So just in these headlines, you see just from the past week or two, recycling takes a hit from coronavirus, or coronavirus cut revenue by $12 million. And Waste Management saying it took a $40 million revenue hit. So this is a public service that we really rely on, and that is really necessary in order to keep these resources in our system and in our economy. But at the moment, this is also being impacted by our current situation. And so, again, trying to just reduce our reliance on throwing things in the recycling bin, because ultimately that is not the final answer or the solution to our problems. When we break it down and in terms of the total waste generated by material, and this is before recycling, and this is in the year 2013, we see that about 27% of the waste that we generate is paper. About 35 or so percent is organics, and that's me combining the food, the yard trimmings, and the wood together. So 14 plus 13 plus 6 is about 33, 34%. Plastics are about 13% of the waste that we create, and metals and glass are about 13% of the waste that we create. So let's jump into the different types of waste. And since paper is the largest source of waste that we create, and we are tree people, and paper comes from trees, and we want to try and save our trees as much as possible, let's talk about paper a little bit. So paper, of course, is made from trees, and trees are sent to lumber mills to make wood products like lumber and plywood and wood chips. And some of the wood waste that's generated through these lumber mills, the waste is sent to paper mills. And these paper products like lunch bags and notebooks and napkins are made from the wood pulp that is the byproduct of the lumber mills. Excuse me. And on an annual basis, the average American uses about 700 pounds or 7 trees of paper and wood products. And that doesn't mean that they can't be recycled, but that's just our average consumption of these materials. And paper manufacturing uses more water per ton than any other product in the world. And it's the 3rd largest industrial consumer of energy. So not only are we chopping down trees to make water, but we are using a lot of, trees to make paper. We're using a lot of water to make that paper. We're using a lot of energy to make that paper. And just to produce 1 ton of paper, it takes about 390 gallons of oil. So, that energy that we're using to make that paper is coming in the form of burning fossil fuels, which is also not great for our environment. When possible, it's great to use recycled paper, because post-consumer recycled paper reduces water pollution by 35%, it reduces air pollution by 74%, and it reduces energy usage by 75%. And interestingly enough, you can actually recycle paper 5 to 7 times before the fibers become too short to recycle. And by the time it reaches its 6th or 7th round of recycling, those really short wood pulp fibers become things like newspapers and egg cartons, maybe even tissue paper and paper towels, because those are ultimately going to be sources of paper that are, paper towels and toilet paper and Kleenex, those aren't recyclable, but you still actually can recycle newspaper and egg cartons as well. So even those later stages of the recycled paper can still be recycled up to about 7 times on average. So if you don't mind throwing some comments into the chat box, we would like to hear from you. Do you have any paper products that you're unsure of if they're recyclable or not? Or if you have any sustainable products that you use instead of paper products, we'd love to give you all an opportunity to share some of your sustainable strategies that you use to reduce paper waste, or if you have something that you're not sure of if it's recyclable, maybe a laminated magazine, or maybe a paper a paperboard to-go box or something. So feel free to type any of those questions or any of your strategies into the chat box. We'll give you all about 30 seconds or so to do that.
What about paper towels, Kenny? You know, we use paper towels for cleaning or food waste. Like, how does that work with paper towels?
Good question. Yeah. So paper towels are like an example of paper that's reached its like later stages. Oftentimes, sometimes paper towels are made from fresh wood pulp, but most of the time those fibers in a paper towel are too short to be recycled. And, you know, if you're using a paper towel, it's most likely got some sort of liquid on it or grease or gunk of some sort that's going to kind of really just contaminate and jeopardize those fibers. So they're not able to separate them. They're not able to clean the grease off of the paper. So unfortunately, things like paper towels are not recyclable. And, you know, maybe that's something that we could strategize on how to minimize our reliance on. Does anybody have any strategies they'd like to share? Let's see. Danica says cardboard boxes from cereal or crackers. The color and coating makes me think it is not. Okay, good question. Yeah, so oftentimes the like shiny coating on the outside of cardboard or paperboard is a very thin layer of plastic. And pardon me, at the recycling facilities, they are actually able to separate and remove that plastic film from the paper, those the wood pulp, the paper pulp. So interestingly enough, you actually can recycle those glossy or kind of laminated cardboard and paperboard products, even though they do have that thin layer of plastic on them. Great question. And Eric says, I've banned disposable napkins and paper towels for reusable. Beautiful, Eric. Thank you very much. Much appreciated. And that's saving a lot of paper out there. So yeah, let's jump into some alternative products you can use. So just as Eric said, you know, he's banned paper towels and and disposable paper products in his house. So maybe Eric's using some towels and rags to clean up messes in the kitchen, or if there's a spill in the kitchen or the bathroom or something. But that's something that can be thrown in the washing machine and used 1,000 more times. And you know, one rag can clean up, you know, 1,000 more messes than one paper towel. And that's just something that we can rely on over and over again. And it's just an easy, great way to reduce your reliance on paper towels, especially now that a lot of our paper goods are in jeopardy. Everyone's hoarding up on them, so there's not many available for a lot of people. So, you know, just having some towels and rags around the house is an easy way to fix that problem and solve that waste issue. Even something simple like bringing your own reusable bags to the grocery store and not having to take paper or plastic bags away from the grocery store. Simple things like that are going to, you know, add up over time, and, you know, you're going to reduce your amount of paper bags significantly if you just bring your own to the farmer's market, to the grocery store. Heck, even when you're going shopping for clothes, why not? You know, just bring your own bag and bring them home in your own bag. I apologize. This is my third presentation of the day, so my throat is giving out on me, but I'm pushing through. You know, I know that a lot of people, including myself, like the smell and the feel of a paperback book or just a physical book. But if you, you know, a Kindle is a way to reduce our reliance on those books. And I know from my own bookshelf that all those books end up just creating a layer for dust to sit on anyway. So a Kindle might be more useful and less dust absorbing than some of the books that might be collecting dust in your home. And I see Eric just threw a comment in here that old t-shirts and socks can become rags. Absolutely, yeah. That's an easy way to repurpose some old clothing that might have a stain or a hole or a tear in it. Maybe the socks are a bit dirty or don't fit anymore, or all my socks seem to have holes in them. So yeah, they end up becoming sock puppets and rags around the house. So and another thing that you can use is like a bandana. I try to carry a bandana in my back pocket whenever I get out of the house. And I never know when I'm going to need to wipe some sweat off my forehead or blow my nose if I'm out in the field and I've got dust flying around or something and I need to blow my nose, wiping up any mess that might be around. And again, when I get home, toss it in the washing machine and I can use that again later, even just to wear it as well, keep the hair out of my face. So let's move onward. So the next category I would consider them to be organics, and this is the combination of food waste, as well as our yard trimmings, as well as wood waste. So let's see about organic waste. When organic matter, like food waste or grass clippings or dead leaves, when it ends up in the landfill, it breaks down into a greenhouse gas called methane, contributing to global warming. And landfills are the third largest human-made cause of methane emissions. And oftentimes we hear of carbon dioxide coming from cars and factories being the propeller of global warming and climate change, but methane is actually at least 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So when methane is emitted into our atmosphere, it's just holding on to that warmth from the sun, and it's just heating up our atmosphere. And we want to try and reduce the amount of organics that we're sending to the landfill so that we ultimately reduce the amount of methane that we're creating in the landfills. Wasted food also equals wasted water. It's wasted gasoline, energy, labor, pesticides, land, and fertilizers. I mean, it's not just the final product of the food, it's the human labor that went into it. It was the extracted minerals that we took from Florida or from Utah to grow those foods. And agriculture is about 70% of our freshwater usage. So when we're wasting, organic materials, we're wasting a lot of the water that could be used in other purposes. And 25% of fresh water used goes towards growing food that won't be consumed. So a quarter of the food that we're growing, or the water that we're using, isn't even going to be consumed. So that's just a huge waste of water and all the other resources that go into the organic waste. Do y'all have any strategies that you use to reduce organic waste? We would love to hear it. Personally, myself, I am a huge fan of composting. I know my colleagues are probably sick and tired of me talking about composting, but
never, Kenny. We would never be tired of you talking about it.
But yeah, composting is a wonderful way to divert that waste from the landfill and support the life in the soil, support the future growth of organics with the nutrients and the microorganisms that will live in the compost pile. Sadly enough, some of my best friends are worms, but it's all good by me. They're great listeners, although they're deaf, so but they don't talk back. Anyway, if y'all have any strategies that you use, please feel free to type them into the chat box, and I'll just kind of list some strategies that I personally try to utilize as much as possible. Even something simple like using a lawnmower that just spits the grass clippings back out onto the lawn. Or if you have one that captures the grass clippings, just spreading them out onto your lawn is actually going to add those nutrients back into the soil. Grass is a great source of nitrogen, and nitrogen is a great fuel for growing organics or growing, fruits, vegetables, anything that grows. So if we just add those grass clippings back onto your yard, that's going to feed your yard the nitrogen that it needs to look beautiful and healthy and better than your neighbor's lawn. But you won't need to add these chemicals, these things that ultimately aren't very sustainable. Let's see. Eric says, monitor leftovers and keeping produce purchases in eyes view so they don't go bad. Wonderful strategy. Yeah, sometimes we might accidentally purchase too much food at the grocery store that we're not going to eat, or if we have leftovers, trying to eat them the next day. I personally love leftovers, and my family calls me the human garbage disposal because I don't like any of the food to go to waste. So I'm constantly eating everybody else's scraps on their place. Broth from veggies, that's a great one. I love that one, Eric. Yeah, so taking your celery leaves, celery stalks, your carrot tops, even heck, things like the chicken bones that are left over from your chicken. Make a chicken broth out of it. Make a vegetable broth, and then you can make a delicious soup or use it to marinate other things later on. So thank you, Eric. That's a lovely strategy. I'll have to add that to here somehow. This pile of soil down here or compost is just that. It's compost. So I was already kind of talking about that. As much as we can try to compost our materials, that's going to just support future generations of growth and, again, divert that waste from the landfill. There's a local organization called Food Finders who is great at collecting foods that are going uneaten. They come at the end of a farmer's market and they make their rounds to each booth. And if the sellers are willing to give up some of their produce, then Food Finders can take that beautiful food and very edible food, fruits and vegetables, and take them to food banks, food shelters, churches, anywhere that food can be redistributed so that food is not going to waste because it's perfectly good food. I have this pen and paper, this little notepad here to kind of just illustrate the point of maybe making like a grocery list, maybe trying to plan out your meals for the week, think about the ingredients that you're going to need for those meals. And that way, when you go to the grocery store, you're only getting the ingredients that are necessary. I used to be, guilty of just going to the grocery store and saying, well, I'm going to get a whole bunch of stuff so I can make whatever I want throughout the week. And then come to find out at the end of the week, a fraction of the food that I bought wasn't eaten and wasn't used. And so it's a shame to have to throw away our organic waste or any waste really. But if we can try to plan ahead for the meals that we're going to eat and only get the key ingredients that we need for those meals, it's going to reduce the amount of waste that we create. And this orange on here and the orange slices are a way to illustrate that, some things like orange peels are a great thing to add to make a little DIY household cleaner. So I have a jar. Oh, it's just out of arm's reach right now, but I have a jar of just like distilled vinegar that I put like a whole bunch of orange peels into, and you just let it kind of sit and cure for about a month or a month and a half. And afterwards, you've got a great cleaning product out of the vinegar that also smells good because you've added those orange peels, and it adds some extra nutrients and cleaning agent. Citrus and other acidic foods are great at breaking down grease and gunk. So adding those orange peels to a cleaning agent will not only be a cool project to do, but more sustainable, more friendly to our earth rather than relying on these chemicals that might be toxic to us and the earth as well. All right, let's move on to plastics, a huge source of waste. Oh, nice. Yeah, Eric, the orange peel and vinegar. Yeah, just throw it in there, let it sit, and in about a month's time, you got yourself some nice homemade cleaning solution. So, use it to clean your tiles, your counters, maybe even some dishes that have some grease and gunk on them. Oh, pardon me. All right, plastics. Sometimes they're unavoidable, especially in these days where all of our food is takeout, and not all of it, but if we're going to a restaurant, it's largely just takeout food right now. A lot of that takeout is being served in plastics and with plastic utensils and wrapping. So let's talk a little bit about plastic. Plastic is made from petroleum oil, which is a non-renewable resource, and making plastic equals lots of water and energy, plus harmful chemicals that can potentially pollute our water and our air systems. And plastic can be recycled about 4 to 6 times, but not all plastics can be recycled. So although this is kind of a general rule, I always advocate that the hard plastics are mostly the recyclable ones, so like bottles and food containers. And usually the soft, flimsy plastics like plastic bags or saran wrap are not generally recyclable, at least in a blue bin. And I know that grocery stores used to be a lot better about accepting, your plastic bags, and they would have recycling programs to where you collect all your plastic bags, you bring it to the grocery store, and then they'll process them. But a lot of these plastic bag recycling programs have actually gone to the wayside, and I believe like Whole Foods and maybe like Gelson's are some of the last grocery stores that are still doing these plastic bag recycling programs. I apologize. And but if we are throwing these plastic bags in our blue bins, oftentimes they're doing more harm than good. They get stuck in the machines that try to process our recyclables. They make it hard for the workers because they have to climb into these machines, making it dangerous. And again, just putting a big tear on our recycling facilities. So A lot of times a recycling facility will have to shut down the entire system so that everything comes to a standstill, just so somebody can climb into a machine and remove a plastic bag that got stuck in there. So, you know, oftentimes we try to do the good thing by recycling, you know, everything that we can, but sometimes, again, it's doing more harm than good. So we want to make sure that we're putting the right materials in the right bins. And plastics do not decompose. They actually just degrade into smaller and smaller pieces, which makes it harder to clean up, and it makes it easily mistakable as food for aquatic animals. So a lot of fish now are eating tiny little microplastics that are working their way up the food chain. So if the fish are eating plastics and we're eating the fish that are eating the plastics, then we're actually finding that we're getting plastic in our systems, our bodies, from eating the animals that ate the plastic. And about 69% of plastic bottles don't even get recycled. And in the Los Angeles area, 20,000 pounds of plastic waste fragments like straws and bags and soda bottles are carried into the Pacific Ocean every day. This could be just from the sprinkler systems, flowing water into the storm drains, or if we do get a nice rain that brings a lot of waste out into the ocean. These things are making their way into the ocean every day. Even people, I'm sure, just sitting at the beach and enjoying the nice, lovely coast ends up polluting the oceans as well. So again, we'd love to hear from you about what are some ways that you reduce plastic waste. Personally, I like to bring my reusable grocery bags to the store, and I have my Hydro Flask water bottle that I fill up like 20 times a day, and that reduces my dependence on plastic water bottles. It's also been shown that plastic water bottles will leach the plastic into the water. So not only is it a environmental concern, but it's becoming a health concern, because these plastics are becoming intertwined in our water that we're drinking if we're drinking out of plastic bottles. And so we're really drinking plastic, which is kind of a scary thought.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for me, Kenny, if I do order takeout, I explicitly tell them not to include any utensils or extra things that they need. And then a lot of times with takeout, they use a plastic container that can be reused. So I try and reuse it as much as I can, so that I'm not, it doesn't become single use then.
Totally, yeah, and thank you for doing that. And luckily here locally in Los Angeles, there was a recent policy that was passed that restaurants aren't going to serve plastic straws just automatically. You have to ask for them now. And most often we really don't need a straw, maybe unless we're drinking a milkshake, which might be the only way you really need a straw. But it's a great way to reduce the amount of plastic waste that we generate just by refusing to use straws for every drink that we're taking. So if we have water, it's probably not necessary to use a straw, so it's not necessary to serve it each time. But let's discuss some ways. So there's a picture of a metal straw. If you really do need a straw, maybe you can use one that is reusable. You can clean it out and reuse it over and over again. There are plenty now on the market that are made from metal, as well as that are like rubber or paper straws. Made a quick hit on the scene for a while, but those seem to get a little bit of a negative pushback because the paper was starting to disintegrate in the liquids, or they get pinched at the top of the lid. And so although it was an attempt to kind of divert from the plastic use for plastic straws, it maybe wasn't the best solution, but hey, we're trying. Again, kind of like a metal reusable water bottle. Not only can you reuse it over and over again, but it's actually going to keep your liquids hot for a long period of time or cold for a long period of time. I throw some ice in my Hydro Flask when I go out for a hike, and when I get to the top of that mountain, I got ice cold water that I can enjoy, and it's not some warm plasticized water that I'm drinking. So something like that. Or if you are going camping and you have some hot coffee, it'll keep it hot for a long time too. I already talked about reusable bags, but of course that'll minimize the reliance on plastic bags. And trying to bring your own cutlery. I know this is like silverware, but you know, there's like bamboo cutlery on the market these days. There's things like palm leaf that are compostable. So if we can avoid, like Ariel was mentioning, like when we're getting takeout, if we can just say, hey, we don't need nice knife there, Eric. Yeah, eating some peanut butter or something. No, I mean, we can reuse these things over and over again, and we don't have to dispose them every time we use them. And my cabinets are filled with Tupperware items that have lids on them, so I'm constantly throwing my leftovers in them and bringing them to work instead of Ziploc baggies or you know, using the to-go foodware that is ultimately just going to be disposed of. So these are just some strategies. All right, and then the last topic or the last category of waste we're going to discuss is metals and glass. And this is a different source of waste than the other ones in that they're actually more sustainable and more reliable than the other types. So glass and metals are the most recyclable materials, and both of these materials can be recycled indefinitely. So glass, you know, paper, as I mentioned, can only be recycled 5 to 7 times, plastic between 4 and 6 times. You can recycle glass over and over and over and over again. So perhaps the glass that we're using today is the same glass that our great-great-grandparents used one day when they actually delivered milk in those glass containers way back when. My old apartment used to have one of those little delivery doors built into it that the milkman would drop your milk into. So it's kind of just a fun remnant of times past that aren't here anymore. But I think they had it right when they had that system that relied on that relied on glass to deliver milk, because those materials could be recycled and repurposed. And glass is made from silica, which is sand, and that can be recycled. And aluminum and tin are the most common metals that can be recycled. And you can make 20 recycled aluminum cans with the same amount of energy that it takes to create one new one. So by recycling our metals, we're, you know, also reducing the amount of energy it takes to make new ones. This is just a little quick illustration of how glass is made and how you can take wasted recycled glass and just kind of mix it with new glass elements. And if you just heat it up hot enough, you can create a new piece of glass out of old wasted glass. So as much as we can, I like to try and use glass and metal products just because they're more sustainable. They're going to last you longer. And if your glass happens to break, at least it can be recycled and used again. So. And the very last one, I said the last one was the last one, but this is the very last one, which is electronic waste, which is, you know, just increasing by the year because of our dependence on these electronics. So when electronics end up in landfills, they have toxics like lead and mercury and cadmium, which can leach into the soil and in our water tables. And more than 48 million tons of e-waste are produced every year. And China discards 750 million electronic devices per year, which is just like, I can't even imagine like what that looks like in real life. Cell phones, 1.5 billion cell phones manufactured in 2018, and they're packed with toxic chemicals. The average American only keeps a cell phone for about 34 months. So then we're discarding these electronics. And only 20% of the e-waste is recycled globally, while most of the remaining 80% ends up in landfills and at home in our region and in other countries where toxic metals leach into their environment as well. And to give you an example, this is what an e-waste recycling facility looks like in Ghana. And this is actually where a lot of our e-waste here in the United States ends up. And here you see these fires in the background. What they're doing is they're melting the plastics that surround these valuable metals on the inside, that gold and those cadmium and these other metals. They burn away the plastic so that the only thing left behind are the metals that they can recycle. But I mean, you can just see this is just a horrifying scene with this cloudy smoke just like toxifying the air. There's children around. There's no protective equipment. There's no protective measures being taken to make sure that the environment and that the people in that community are healthy. And you can only imagine the health consequences and the environmental consequences of this type of recycling. So, you know, one solution is just that, like, fixing the problem is a way to fix the problem is fixing our stuff. So we need to push corporations and manufacturers to make more sustainable products, repairable products, things that can be easily fixed with interchangeable pieces instead of just saying, oh, well, your battery's shot, now you just need a brand new cell phone. If we can just replace that battery and we can save the integrity of the rest of the phone and the materials in that phone, it's only going to reduce the amount of waste that we're generating from electronics. So again, just to hit it on the head one more time, you know, we want to try and exist in a circular fashion as much as possible, instead of just extracting resources from our earth, sending them to the landfill, and allowing those resources to go to complete waste. We want to try to reutilize, repurpose, reuse, recycle all of those materials that we extract from earth, so that we're not, you know, just tearing our earth apart in order to make the products that we rely on, but we're just going to end up failing our future generations, because they're not going to have anything to rely on to make those products that we rely on. So TreePeople, we just came up with this home waste audit. Check it out. Ariel, I believe we have this up on the website. Is that right? Yeah, so check out treepeople.org/learn-at-home, and you can check out this home waste audit and kind of just tally up different types of, oh, thank you for that link. Yeah, just to tally up the different types of waste that you see in your home. Are most of the waste items recyclable, or are they mostly trash? Is there a way that you can divert that waste going on in your home? And there's some questions to follow up with. So if you're interested, if you have some kids that are looking for something to do, send them digging through the trash, and keep them busy throughout the day, and figure out how you might be able to reduce those types of waste. And if you've got any questions, if you've got any concerns or comments, please, please, please feel free to reach out. Again, my name is Kenny Derrig. Here's my email address, kderrig@treepeople.org. I'd be happy to answer any questions right now, if y'all have got any questions, or in the future, if you'd like to continue the conversation offline, I'm also happy to do that. And that wraps it up for today's conversation. And I just want to thank you all for joining today. And Ariel, do you have any final words of wisdom for our group?
You can. That was great. Learned so much about different ways that we can reduce our waste, because it's staggering, the numbers really, and what we're creating as humans. So I appreciate those friendly tips.
My pleasure.
And we will, you know, we also have those 2 videos out that talk about waste if anyone wants to check them out. So just go to our Learn at Home website, email us with any questions, and we'd love to see any of your efforts to reduce waste. We've seen some pretty incredible, innovative things. A couple of you today were sharing some really interesting things. Post them on social media, we'll share them, and just, you know, spread community understanding around waste reduction and these innovative ways that we can do this.
Absolutely, yeah. And thank you, Eric, and thank you, Lou, and thank you, Danica, for joining us today and for participating and continuing the awesome work that you're already doing. We appreciate you. And yeah, again, feel free to reach out anytime.
Great. Thank you, Kenny. And bye, everybody. And we'll see you next week for our topic, which is seeds. So it'll be a good week.
Thanks, Eric. You rock.
Bye, everybody.
Keep rocking. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Have a good one.